Morning of the will reading, my son-in-law wore a tie. That was the first thing I noticed. Preston never wore ties, not to Christmas dinner, not to his own wedding rehearsal, not even to my wife's funeral 3 weeks prior. But that morning, he sat across from me at the dining room table. My dining room table, in my house, with a navy blue tie knotted too tight at his throat, and he had a yellow legal pad in front of him with things already written on it. My daughter, Elaine, sat beside him. She didn't look at me. I remember thinking they rehearsed this. My wife Dorothy had been gone 22 days. 22 days since I'd held her hand in the hospice room, while the machine beside her bed made sounds I still hear sometimes when the house gets too quiet at night. 41 years we were married. 41 years of her laugh, her coffee cup on the wrong side of the sink, her reading glasses left on every surface in the house. 22 days since all of that became past tense, and here was my son-in-law with the legal pad and a tie, ready to talk business. We should get started, Preston said. Not good morning. Now how are you holding up? Just, we should get started. I folded my hands on the table and waited. He cleared his throat. So obviously there's the question of the property. The property. That's what he called it. The house Dorothy and I bought in 1987, the house where Elaine learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where we painted the kitchen 3 different colors before Dorothy finally settled on the yellow she wanted, where I built the back deck with my own hands over 2 summers board by board, because we couldn't afford to hire someone, and I wanted her to have a place to sit outside in the evenings. The property. Dad, Elaine said quietly. She still wasn't looking at me. We've been thinking, and we want to be honest with you. The house is really too big for one person, and with the upkeep costs, I maintain this house fine, I said. Preston tapped his legal pad. That's not really the point. The point is, financially, it makes more sense for you to move somewhere smaller, somewhere more manageable. And Elaine and I, we could take over the property, handle the mortgage, make sure it stays in the family. There is no mortgage, I said. We paid it off in 2009. A pause. He hadn't known that. I watched him recalibrate. Even more reason, he said. A paid-off property this size, in this neighborhood, you're sitting on significant equity, Howard. It would be irresponsible not to. My name, I said, is Dad, or Mr. Callum, not Howard. Elaine flinched. Preston kept his eyes on his legal pad. I want to explain something about Preston. He wasn't always like this, or maybe he was, and I never paid close enough attention. He and Elaine had been married 11 years. He worked in commercial insurance, did well enough, drove a car that was slightly too expensive for what he actually earned. He was the kind of man who talked about investments and leverage at Thanksgiving dinner, and then looked around to see if anyone was impressed. Dorothy never trusted him. She told me once, 2 or 3 years into the marriage, that there was something performative about him. He's always selling something, she said, even when there's nothing to sell. I told her she was being too hard on him. I've thought about that conversation a lot in the past few months. What Preston wanted that morning was simple. When you stripped away all the legal pad language, he wanted the house. He wanted Dorothy's life insurance payout to be reinvested, his word, into a rental property he and a business partner were developing. He wanted me to move into a 55-plus community 40 minutes away in Marigold Pines, which he had already, he mentioned casually, looked into. He even had a brochure. He slid it across the table like it was a gift. Marigold Pines. I'd driven past it once. That looked like a place people went to finish up. This is what Dorothy would have wanted, Elaine said. She said it quietly like she'd been working up to it. For you to be comfortable. To not be alone out here. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's cheekbones, and it hurt every time I looked at her those days because of it. But she wasn't looking at me the way her mother used to. She was looking at me the way someone looks at a problem they've already decided how to solve. I'd like you both to leave now, I said. Preston started to say something. I stood up from the table, and something in the way I did it, slowly, deliberately, the way a man stands up when he is finished, made him stop. They left. Preston still had the brochure. Here's what they didn't know. Here's what nobody knew, because Dorothy and I had decided together, years ago, that it was nobody else's business. In 2003, Dorothy was diagnosed with early-stage ovarian cancer. We caught it early, thank God, and after surgery and treatment, she was clear. But those months rearranged something in both of us. We stopped taking things for granted. We started being more deliberate about our time, our money, our plans. We updated our wills. We set up a trust. We made decisions quietly together, and we didn't discuss them at Thanksgiving dinner. Dorothy's estate was not complicated, but it was specific. The house was mine, outright, held in the trust we'd established, with provisions that were very clear about what could and could not be done with it during my lifetime. Her life insurance, $340,000, went directly into the trust as well, managed by our attorney, a woman named Sandra Hopel, who had handled our legal affairs for 15 years and who Dorothy had specifically chosen because, as Dorothy put it, she doesn't let people push her around. There was a provision in the trust that Elaine would receive a substantial inheritance. There was also a provision, and this was Dorothy's idea, not mine, though I agreed with it completely, that the inheritance would be held in a separate managed account until either 5 years had passed or certain conditions were met. Dorothy had watched her own cousin lose an inheritance to a controlling spouse inside of 18 months. She wasn't sentimental about money. She was careful. What Preston had been planning, I later understood, assumed none of this existed. He assumed Dorothy's estate would pass to Elaine, simply, directly, and that between the two of them, and with me, as he'd put it to Elaine privately, being elderly and overwhelmed, they could consolidate everything into a single plan that centered on the two of them. He had assumed a lot of things. The weeks after Dorothy died were the loneliest of my life, and I mean that in a way that's hard to fully explain. Lonely isn't quite the right word. The house was full of her books still on the nightstand, her handwriting on the grocery list still stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet from a trip we took to the Outer Banks in 2018. I didn't move any of it. I wasn't ready. I'd come downstairs in the morning and make 2 cups of coffee before I remembered, and then I'd sit there with both cups and look out at the back deck and try to figure out what I was supposed to do next. My son-in-law called 3 times that first week after our conversation at the table. I didn't answer. He emailed twice. I read them and closed the laptop. Elaine called on a Thursday night. I answered because she was still my daughter, regardless of anything else. "Dad," she said, "Preston's not trying to be. He just thinks." "I know what he thinks," I said. "We're worried about you. I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" And here's the thing about Elaine. Underneath whatever Preston had built up in her over 11 years, underneath the legal pads and the brochures and the recalibrated plans, she was still the girl who used to bring me drawings of horses when she was 5 years old. She was still my kid. So when she asked if I was okay, there was something real in it, and I couldn't be cold to that. "Not yet," I said, "but I will be." It was Sandra Hopewell who first told me what Preston had been doing. I'd gone to her office in early November to go over the trust documents, partly because I needed to understand the specifics, and partly because I needed to sit across from someone sensible and be told that things were in order. Sandra had that quality. She was in her late 50s, direct, and she wasted very little time on things that didn't matter. "Before we go through the documents," she said, "there's something you should probably know." She pulled out a folder. Preston, it turned out, had contacted her office twice, once before Dorothy had even passed while she was still in hospice, asking questions about the estate. He'd framed it as being concerned about my ability to handle affairs of my own after Dorothy was gone. He had asked specifically whether there were mechanisms by which a child of the deceased could petition for oversight of a surviving parent's financial decisions if that parent was deemed to be in cognitive decline. I stared at her across the desk. "He used those words," I said. "Cognitive decline." His exact words were struggling to cope with the realities of estate management. Sandra kept her voice neutral. I told him that all inquiries about this estate needed to come through you and that I was not in a position to discuss anything further. He called back a week later and I told him the same thing. I thought about the tie, the legal pad, the Marigold Pines brochure sitting across my own dining room table. "What is my actual position here?" I asked. "Legally." "Simply." Sandra folded her hands. "Simply, Dorothy structured this trust well. The house is yours for your lifetime. No one can compel you to sell or vacate. The life insurance is in managed trust. Elaine's inheritance exists and is substantial, but it's not accessible in the way your son-in-law appears to have imagined. She paused. He seems to have assumed that Dorothy left everything to Elaine outright. She didn't. No, she did not. I sat with that for a moment. 41 years, and even at the end, Dorothy was still protecting me, still thinking 2 steps ahead. I'd been the one who thought I was practical, the one who fixed things around the house and handled the taxes and knew how to change the oil, but Dorothy was the one who'd walked into Sandra Hopel's office 15 years ago and said, "I want to make sure he's okay if I go first." I had to take a minute before I could speak again. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Nothing right now," Sandra said, "but I'd like you to let me know if he approaches you again about any financial matters. And I'd like you to consider whether you want to send a formal communication making clear that all estate-related conversations go through this office." "I'd like to do that," I said. Yes, Preston didn't wait long. The second meeting, if you want to call it that, happened at Elaine's house in mid-November. She'd invited me for Sunday dinner, which I'd taken at face value. I drove the 40 minutes, brought a bottle of wine, and sat down to a table that had Preston at the head of it, and a man I didn't recognize sitting beside him. "Dad," Elaine said, "this is Preston's business partner, Todd Rafferty." Todd Rafferty had a firm handshake and the particular kind of smile that men practice in mirrors. He had folders in front of him. I picked up my fork. "We thought," Preston said, "that it would be useful to talk through some options. Todd's been involved in several estate liquidation situations, and he has some thoughts on how to—" "Elaine," I said. She looked at me. "Did you invite me for dinner, or for this?" She didn't answer. Her hands were in her lap, and she was looking at the centerpiece, and in that moment I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt sorry for her. Not for me. For her, because she'd let this man turn a Sunday dinner into a business meeting 14 days after her mother's funeral, and I didn't think she fully understood yet what that said about things. I put my napkin on the table, thanked her for the wine, and left. In the car, I called Sandra Hopel's cell. She answered on the 3rd ring. "I need to send that letter," I said. Sandra's letter went out on a Monday. It was formal and precise, and it laid out, in the calm language of estate law, exactly what the trust contained, what my rights were, and what the consequences would be if anyone attempted to interfere with or misrepresent those rights to any financial institution, real estate entity, or court of law. It also noted that all prior inquiries made to this office by anyone other than myself were made without my knowledge or authorization. I don't know exactly what happened on Preston's end when he received that letter. I wasn't there. What I know is that Elaine called me that evening and she was crying, and it was the first real conversation we'd had in weeks. "He told me it was straightforward," she said. "He said Mom's estate would just transfer. He said we'd be helping you." "I know." He talked about it like it was already decided. He had spreadsheets, Dad. He had spreadsheets before Mom was even. She stopped. I waited. "He had spreadsheets before she was gone," she said quietly. There are moments in a conversation when you understand that something is going to change. Not all at once, not cleanly, but change nonetheless. This was one of those moments. I didn't say anything that would make it harder for her. I just listened. "I didn't know about the call to Sandra," she said. "The one where he asked about cognitive decline. I didn't know he did that." "I know you didn't," I said, and I believe that. "I did. I'm sorry, Dad. I know you are." We talked for a long time that night. About her mother. About the yellow kitchen. About the morning I'd made 2 cups of coffee before I remembered. Elaine cried and I let her. And somewhere in the middle of it, she said something I've thought about many times since. I kept thinking he was doing it for us, but it was never about us, was it? I didn't answer that. She didn't need me to. The formal reading of the will happened in Sandra's office on a Tuesday in December. Elaine came. Preston came because Elaine was still, at that point, his wife. And because I think some part of him believed there was still a card to play. Sandra read the trust documents clearly and without flourish. The house, mine, for my lifetime, with provisions for Elaine after my death that were specific and generous. The life insurance, managed trust, not directly accessible. Elaine's inheritance held in a structured account for 5 years, unless she met certain conditions, specifically including that the funds could not be commingled with marital assets without court approval, a provision Dorothy had included precisely because she was Dorothy, and she was always thinking. Preston had a pen in his hand. He was very still while Sandra read. When Sandra finished, he said, "And there's no mechanism by which the real estate could be—" "No," Sandra said. She didn't let him finish the sentence. He looked at his pen. I looked at him, and I thought about my wife in Sandra's office 15 years ago, making careful decisions and not telling anyone, just quietly making sure that the people she loved would be protected from people like him. She'd never met Preston when she made those decisions. She'd just known that the world had people like him in it. I thought about the yellow kitchen. I thought about the deck I'd built, board by board. I thought about 2 cups of coffee in the morning. "I think we're finished," Sandra said. Preston left without saying anything to me. I don't know what he said to Elaine in the car. I don't know exactly what happened between them in the weeks after that, though Elaine has told me some of it since. What I know is that by February she'd spoken to her own attorney. By April, she'd moved back into the house she grew up in, into her old room down the hall, and we'd spend evenings together on the back deck I'd built, drinking coffee and watching the light change over the yard. She asked me once if I was angry. Not at Preston, at her. At the legal pad, the brochure, the Sunday dinner that wasn't a Sunday dinner. I thought about it honestly. For a little while, I said. Not anymore. She looked at the yard. Mom would have handled this better than I did, she said. Your mother, I said, handled it better than any of us. She just did it 15 years ago. Elaine was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. A small, surprised laugh, the kind that catches you off guard. And I heard her mother in it, just for a second. The evening light was coming through the oak tree at the edge of the yard, the one Dorothy had planted as a sapling when Elaine was 7 years old, long enough ago that it was now taller than the house. I looked at it and thought about all the evenings we'd sat out here and watched that tree grow, all the years of ordinary life that had happened while it got bigger and more rooted. You build things slowly, is what I've learned. A deck, a tree, a marriage, a trust that protects the people you love from the ones who might not be worthy of them. You build things slowly, and then one day you realize the thing you built is still standing, even when you're gone. Dorothy knew that. She always did. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what it actually taught me. Not the legal part. Sandra handled that. Not the marriage part. That's Elaine's to work through. I mean the deeper thing. The thing underneath. Here's what I keep coming back to. Preston didn't fail because he got unlucky. He failed because of who he was, applied consistently over time. Every choice he made, calling Sandra before Dorothy was even gone, bringing a business partner to a Sunday dinner, writing things on a legal pad while a man was still raw from losing his wife of 41 years. Every one of those choices came from the same place. He'd decided that other people existed in relation to what he could get from them. That's not a legal problem. That's a character problem. And character, in my experience, always finds a way to settle the bill. Dorothy understood this. That's the part that still gets me. She sat in Sandra's office 15 years ago, 15 years before any of this happened, and she made decisions based on who she knew people to be and who she knew people might become. She wasn't bitter about it, she wasn't dramatic. She just looked clearly at the world and prepared accordingly. That's not cynicism, that's intelligence applied with love. The two things aren't opposites. The wisest people I've ever known held both at the same time. What I didn't do well, and I can say this now, was pay attention. I saw the signs with Preston. I heard Dorothy when she said he was always selling something. I just didn't want the discomfort of taking that seriously, so I called her too hard on him and moved on. That's not kindness. That's avoidance wherein kindness is a costume. The cost of that avoidance wasn't mine alone to pay. Elaine paid part of it too, 11 years of her life. That's the weight I carry, not the house, not the trust documents. I think about what might have been different if I'd taken Dorothy's read on him seriously back then. I don't know that I could have changed anything, but I could have been more present. I could have paid better attention to my daughter, rather than keeping the peace at my own table. What I know is this. The people who try to take things they haven't earned, who look at someone else's 41 years of building and see only an asset to be captured, they always reveal themselves eventually. You don't have to do anything dramatic. You just have to be still, be clear, and let the truth of who they are do its work. Preston revealed himself at a dining room table with a navy tie and a legal pad. Dorothy had already prepared the answer 15 years earlier. That's the kind of quiet that carries more weight than any argument ever could. I'm 68 years old. I have a back deck I built with my own hands. I have a daughter who's finding her way back. I have an oak tree in the yard that Dorothy planted when Elaine was 7, and some evenings we sit out there together and don't say very much, and that is enough. That is more than enough. The things worth keeping don't announce themselves. They just hold.